Hello, I'm Maria Hall Brown, and this is LA Currents. As an oral art form, it actually predates the written word, poetry. But keeping poetry alive and celebrating it in these modern times, I'm delighted to be joined today by the Los Angeles Poet Laureate, Lynne Thompson. So great to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
We were talking a little bit before we started rolling, the fact that you kind of came into poetry sideways or on the slant.
Yes.
I love that, on the
Yes.
slant.
Yes.
I know your father loved poetry, and I know that you said that you've been influenced by Pablo Neruda, Edward Hoagland, James Cortez, a whole litany of poets. But how did you end up falling in love with poetry and deciding you should be one?
Well, it was a long process. My father was a lover of poetry and read poetry to me as a child. And actually, my sister-in-law found one of my earliest poems that I wrote for her and my brother when they married, and I was about 10. So clearly I had been scribbling for a long time. Aww. But then I went to law school, and poetry went by the wayside. And I remember going into a bookstore and picking up a book of Pablo Neruda's 20 Love Songs and a Song of Despair, and thinking, I'll have what he's having. This is fantastic, right? And I really felt that what I needed in my life was poetry. So I stopped practicing, went to work at UCLA where I was able to use my legal background, but really committed myself to writing poetry.
I'm sorry. You stopped practicing. These didn't cross over.
They did not cross over.
That is a very brave move.
Some of my friends and family said it was a foolish move, but I got a really good job at UCLA. I was the director of their Employee and Labor Relations Office, so it wasn't like I just kind of tiptoed through the tulips. I was still responsible, still paying the bills, etc., but I wanted to do this in a serious way, and I didn't feel that I could do that if I was practicing law, if I was a litigator.
So did you actually take poetry classes or literature classes, or did you sit down and, read and read and read and read and read? I mean, how does one actually make a move into becoming a poet?
All of the above. I went to every workshop I could find, and we're lucky here in Los Angeles. Everybody wants to come to LA, right? Mm-hmm. So we would get wonderful writers here, from W.S. Merwin to Yusef Komunyakaa, wonderful writers that would come to California and Los Angeles specifically because it's a great place to come. And they would give workshops and they would give readings, and I attended every single one that I could. I subscribed to as many literary journals as I could afford, got out into the community, met a lot of people who were very welcoming and supportive, and basically did everything I could outside of the academy to become learned about poetry.
Poetry, obviously, take it away from its academic, where we have to learn when we're in school, etc. Is it a vibrant world just in the world? Because it seems to me that it almost has almost a niche, precious component to it.
It has that, but it is also very much celebrated across the world. The great thing, if there's anything that has come out of, I won't use the word great, that's overstating it in terms of the pandemic, but what the pandemic led to was that the poetry readings that had been scheduled, people that were ready to launch their books and suddenly were shut down at home, all ended up on Zoom or some form of Zoom.
Right.
And we were drawing as a community poets from all over the world because all you had to do was log on. The poetry tradition is a strong one, and I always tell people who question it, I said, you can question it as part of your everyday life, but let someone get married, have a baby, graduate, a death, a tragedy like 9/11, who do they turn to? They want the poets. They want us to put language around the unsayable.
Right. Does your law career fit into this? I mean, were you able to utilize it, or did you just, is there a practical nature to what you were doing, or just the awareness of what you had learned being a litigator? Did the intersection of these two things work, or did you just keep them separate?
They're pretty separate, except to the extent that it's all about language. What
Right.
makes us human is language, and what we use it for and in what settings we use it. So the lawyer is trying to convince someone of the correctness of their argument, right? poetry is not trying to convince, it's trying to name the unnameable.
Right.
It's trying to capture something that we all suspect we know, but we haven't found the language for. How do we put the language around that? So I would say they're relatively separate. They've crossed a little bit more recently because it's hard to live in these times and not address the political climate, and I'm talking in the lowercase p, political climate that we're all living through,
Sure.
from climate change to government to the whole spectrum, what's happening in our streets. So my legal background is sort of coming into my poetry life. But other than that, I've kept them pretty separate.
Speaking of your poetry, exactly, I know that you have themes of family, and I know that you'll never read that poem that you wrote for the wedding.
No.
You've said
No.
Not even a phrase.
No.
Oh, I'm sure it's fantastic.
I don't have it memorized, so
Oh, there you go.
I have no idea.
You write about LA, you write about themes of family and fathers, but there is an element to your poetry which I think is, forgive me, perhaps unorthodox. Where did math come into the whole thing?
Oh, yes, that poem was a surprise. I'm assuming you're referring to the one that was recently on the Academy of
Yes.
American Poets website, my Einsteinicity.
Exactly.
So anyone who knows me knows that I am terrible at math. I can't believe I'm publicly admitting it, but so shoot me now. But the idea of it is very interesting to me. So I thought if I could apply arithmetic principles to language to give meaning, that would be kind of a way to say, please forgive me for being so lousy at math. So that was the way I did that with that, and sometimes I use a little science, also not a scientist, but it doesn't mean those areas don't interest me. I'm just not proficient in them.
So those areas that do, is there something that you feel, something that you see, something that you've walked by, something that you've just pondered? What's the genesis of something that allows Lynne to sit down and say, this has words attached to it, this has meaning?
Well, what I have learned over the course of doing this for now almost 25 years, which seems kind of unbelievable, is that everything is fodder for your poetry. So if I'm coming out of the house this morning and the sun is shining on a ledge and I see a lizard, I'm cataloging that in the back of my mind, thinking, what metaphor is here? How can I use that? And I think that the best poets open themselves to all the possibilities that are around them every day, whether they pertain to them specifically or a part of the world beyond them. Everything is fodder, and I've had people look at me and say, Are you writing a poem in your head? You have that look on your face.
You've got poetry eyes happening right now.
You got your poetry eyes. You got to remember that. You got your poetry eyes on. Exactly.
But that's something that I think that maybe needs to be explained or demystified or something, because poems are at once extremely personal, but sometimes they feel inaccessible because they can be complex, or there's a lot of meaning wrapped around something, and the reader at the time is supposed to understand that or figure it out for themselves. So how do you, when you're hoping that people will feel like poetry is something for everyone, how do you say, no, don't worry about that, this is what you need to focus on?
Yeah, I think everybody comes to poetry. It may not feel like a natural language, but if you listen to kids, they're rhyming, they're making up little verses as they play their games. Language is something to play with. Some people play it hard, man, and it's inexplicable. It'd be like if I tried to play basketball, the moves and I don't get it. I like to watch it, but I can't do it. But I would say there's so much poetry accessible now on the internet, on podcasts, on a variety of platforms that people can go in and pick and choose. A lot of magazines, the Atlantic Monthly, will have maybe one or two poems. Some of them you're going to get and they're going to resonate. Don't worry if they don't. There'll be another one that does. Mm-hmm. So if you're curious about it, just dip your toe in. And the more you listen, I'm thinking of a good friend of mine, also a lawyer, who started listening to a podcast. And she said, at first I didn't get it, but you're my friend and I know you're a poet, so I started, and she'll call me periodically very excited saying, I heard this poet, first of all, she's no good or he's no good, but then there was this line that was amazing, So you have to give yourself time, as you would, for example, with a foreign film. Maybe you can't get into those subtitles at first, but you hang in there with it because maybe you like the scenery or you like the star or whatever. Give yourself time and don't beat yourself up about it. There's some poem for every single person.
Well, and as we were saying also, that a lot of what we mistake is that they're well read, but they should be heard.
Correct.
Because I'm imagining that when you are writing, you are hearing your voice. So you promised me that you would be able to share one of yours.
Okay, I'm going to try to do this from memory. I think it'll become clear what it's about as I recite it. Seed of mango, seed of maize. I saw one of the grandmothers only once in a photograph. Short and sturdy she was, a black Carib with a forehead wide as the sea that kisses Port Elizabeth, and a nose broad as the nostrum of Admiralty Bay. Breathing deeply, her breath was fume of coconut and allspice, mango and frangipani, blackbird and blue sky, was the Isle of Bequia. She conjured a daughter, then jinxed another, and they bedeviled 5 daughters between them, and I am one of those, flying fish. The other grandmother I composed from myth and half-told stories. She was a red Cheyenne, scorched earth, much chaste, sported a thick reed of braid pulled off from her forehead, wide as Dakota before it was north and south. She hisses warnings across 10, then 10 times 10 more years to a son who reshapes them for me in my dreams, sometimes in my waking. As flute, blue maize, dance of the sun she comes, crow on the wing, singing up the ghosts. And I am one of those, a ghost, singing.
There's something incredibly emotional about having that gift. So thank you. And the power of the imagery that you just created. I mean, they're standing there with you while we're talking. So, excuse me, I need to compose myself a little bit. My goodness, that's
the
really,
reaction. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Just when I composed out of the myth, that was just amazing. So now there's hopefully, I think we're dealing with a renaissance for the appreciation of poetry. Do you feel as if that's happening as well, or is this just because I'm having the good fortune of spending time with you? And I mean, it feels as if there's an appreciation that is growing as time passes.
I do think we are living in a very strong age for the love of poetry. Everything has a season, as the book of Ecclesiastes says, and I think we're living in a very, very strong season for that. It has been for a while, maybe the last 15 years or so, it seems to have had a renaissance. And then this young woman named Amanda Gorman came along. And what she has done for poetry, her poise, and just the power of her delivery at the inauguration, I think has upped the stakes even more, because everyone, of course, is saying, who is that young woman? How fabulous was she? I could not do at 22 I couldn't find the bathroom at 22. So I just thought she was amazing. And of course, she's a Los Angeles product, so we're very proud of her. And she and others have really, the television, people being able to actually see and hear poets, I think in the last 15 years has really, really upped the game in the appreciation of the spoken word.
Well, she was the youth poet for Los Angeles.
She was the youth poet
and
for Los Angeles.
You are the poet laureate for Los Angeles.
Not the youth poet for.
You are. We can give you any title we desire. But has she changed what you are able to do? And by the way, what is the Poet Laureate of Los Angeles able to do, and what is it that you want to do, and has she changed what you can do?
I wouldn't say that she has changed what I can do, unless she can get me on the cover of Vogue, which I understand she's going to be. It's going to be out on newsstands shortly, but not so much changed it, but certainly made me aware that there are opportunities to be seized and suggestions to be made. So the responsibility of the Poet Laureate is to be a literary ambassador for the city and beyond, to represent Los Angeles and the myriad wonderful, wonderful poets that we have here, and take that out to the world and share it as broadly as possible. Try to get it into communities that might not otherwise have access to it or think they have access to it, from elementary schools to senior facilities. One of my predecessors, Luis Rodriguez, took poetry into the prisons, really to try to get it out in the world. So the thing that I've started that I'm the most proud of thus far is a new podcast that's housed currently on the LA Public Library site. We do plan to take it to Spotify, Apple apps, and Google apps, so that people will be able to access it. And once a week, I'll read the poem of someone other than myself, talk about that person just a little bit, and just put that person out into the world. Some people will like Poet A over Poet B, that's fine. I just want to have a way to get it out into the world.
Is LA known as a bastion of poets and poetry? I mean, it's not first of mind when I think of, of course, I'm dating myself, I'll think of, the Irish poets that have had such a, a hard, dramatic life.
Exactly.
Is LA?
And I think that increasingly so, LA is thought of that way. But of course, for those of us not in New York, there was a certain amount of, New York was the place and it was the only place. It is not the only place. And Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, our state is replete with wonderful poets, as is the rest of the country. And I think the long-held myth that it was New York or nothing is really going by the wayside. We have had amazing poets that have come out of this town, and they're getting a greater and greater platform.
You're right about New York, and there's an attention paid there too. I mean, just anecdotally, their poet laureate would have some of the phrases of their poems on the subways.
Exactly.
So you're going to be in Metrolink?
Exactly. I don't know if I'm in Metrolink, but I am on one of those rotating billboards along with other poets in West Hollywood on the corner of La Brea and Santa Monica Boulevard.
Okay.
And a friend of mine said, I almost crashed the car. I was driving and there you were on the billboard. So we have that. And the other thing that West Hollywood is doing is putting up banners. This month, April, is Poetry Month.
Yes.
And so they're putting up banners of various poets. But I would like to talk to the city about doing something more permanent. So I'm going to work on that during my tenure.
And do you have editorial control over what is used and how it's used?
I always tell people I have no control over
go.
anything, but
None of us do.
I think I will have influence over what is used. The city will probably say where it is used, certainly, but I think I will have some influence over what is used. And my goal will be to highlight the poets of all ages and all accomplishments in this city.
You didn't even want to apply.
No, I didn't want to apply. As I said, there's so many fine poets that could be sitting in this chair with you this morning, and I am acutely aware of that. So I just thought, I'm not an academic, I don't have a PhD, I don't teach in the academy, blah, blah, blah. And a friend said, oh, for heaven's sakes, get over yourself and just apply. But then, so I had applied last spring with others. It was an open call, and believed that they were going to make the announcement last April. Well, then this little thing called a pandemic came along.
Right.
None of us heard anything about it, so I just thought, you know what, the city has bigger fish to fry. And so when I was contacted and said, oh, congratulations, you've been selected by the mayor as the Poet Laureate, I thought, is this one of those calls where they say, and I've also lost $10,000, could you send me a check?
Yeah, exactly.
I said, I don't believe it. But sure enough, it was true.
And so how has your life changed? I mean, it's only been a few months. I mean, it's been February to
Yes,
now.
yeah.
But how have things changed? Do you feel different? Do you see your life differently? Do you wake up in the morning and say, wait, did that really happen?
There are some mornings I wake up and say, I'm the poet laureate.
You are.
Get out of town.
You can't deny that
I
ever
can't
again.
deny that ever again. I would not be sitting here with you if I wasn't the poet laureate, more likely than not. So I've become, yes, much busier. Hearing from old friends I hadn't heard from in 30 years. Hi, Lynn, how you doing? Yeah. So yes, it's obviously put me out into the world in a way that I wasn't before. Getting a lot of calls, emails from people, both that I haven't seen in a while, requests to appear at places like this, which I consider very
really fun.
chic. And I am a little worried. I say, okay, Lynn, don't forget, you're a poet. Carve out some time to work on what got you here. You know, so, but yeah, you can't help but feel immensely honored and proud of doing it. And for me, a little vindicated. For those who said, oh, you know, you're a lawyer. And I said, why do I have to be one thing? Why can't I be? I've done that for almost 15 years. Now I think I want to do something else. So I do feel vindicated for people who think, how do you even get there? You figure it out. What works for you to get you to your best creative self? Won't be easy necessarily. It certainly won't be a straight path, but you can do it. But you have to be committed to it.
So to that point that you've had to carve out this time to maintain the poet part of being the poet laureate, you write anywhere at any time? Do you take notes on your iPhone? Do you said you take mental notes, but how is that process working for you? And has it shifted now that you have this title, responsibility, and spotlight?
All of the above in terms of the where. Someone asked me the other day, what's your favorite spot to write in? I said, it's wherever the idea comes. Because certainly, and I think this is true of every writer, and everybody does it differently, that full-time job, you do have to pay a little bit of attention to it. So how do you find times? You train yourself to jot it down in your phone. I used to call myself driving on the Hollywood freeway, right? Lynn, that line isn't correct. It should read such. I get home, press the play button, there's a message from myself.
There you go.
You do whatever you have to do. You always carry paper with you. You always be ready. You repeat something over and over so it sticks in your head if you have nothing to write it down with. You write wherever you have to write to do it.
And now, though, you have an audience built in. People don't necessarily have to look as hard for you because you have this title, these accolades, these opportunities to present. And has that changed the meaning and the message of what you want your poems to say? Because now you know that you have a built-in audience that maybe you weren't sure you were going to have before.
Exactly. It's an interesting thought process for me in terms of knowing that I have a platform to put things out there and thinking about that differently than, so I've written this poem, maybe some journal will publish it, maybe they won't publish it, maybe 1,000 people will see it, I'm not worried about it. Now I'm acutely aware that a larger number of people will see it and that I want to be a good poetry citizen, which doesn't always mean coddling the audience and always talking about hearts and flowers, because we're not living in a hearts and flowers kind of time. So you want to be honest about it, but you're also aware that, okay, this is going to stick on you. This is not a throwaway moment. This is a moment where your voice, if it affects 5 people, has done something special. Don't waste that opportunity. So it's changed me in that way. I was on a Zoom reading the other day, and they said, "Oh, we have 400 people signed up." Yikes! You know, a poet is usually happy if 20 people show up in the audience. You've succeeded, right? So it made me a little bit nervous to realize, okay, people are saying, "So you're the poet laureate? What you got?"
Yeah,
you know,
there's a bit of pressure there.
It's a little bit of pressure there. Yeah. So it's changed it in that way. But in terms of my own writing, I've been part of a workshop group. Gosh, we've been together maybe 13, 14 years. We meet once a month. Dorothy Barisi, wonderful poet who teaches at Cal State Northridge, convenes our group. And we always know we need to come with a poem. So at the very minimum, I got to step up and bring a poem.
Wow.
So.
Well, and to that point, you know, your cluster of people that are poets that you said you know with Zoom you're able to have this international connection, and now, as you said, you've been part of this group for 13 years. What has been the response of poets around the world and also locally to this accolade that you've received?
I have to say it's been overwhelming.
Yeah.
Everybody, I haven't even intimated anybody, I don't know why it's her, which I thought some people might feel, but everyone has been so kind, so congratulatory, so supportive. It's really been, and the way I really know it, I was feeling that anyway, but this reading that I was in last week, I think, some of my family was on the call.
Oh.
And many of them said, good Lord, they love you. And I said, yeah, they really do, huh? And so it's been humbling and really, really outstanding.
But you have to think about what you've succeeded in doing. First of all, you know, shining a light on poetry. Second of all, shining a light on, you know, second chances and making a decision that you can choose the, you know, the second chapter of your life. And then think of all the young people that you are impacting. I mean, that has to be pretty profound.
That's what I'm hoping for, that I can say to them, listen, if you decide you want to be a farmer today,
fine.
And 10 years from today you say, I really should have gone to Wall Street in the first place, or vice versa, you can do that. Some people will tell you, that's a ridiculous leap, why would you do it, what about this, what about that? If it's what you want, make sure it's what you want. And sometimes you're not completely sure, but you take a little bit of a leap of faith, try to put as much security around yourself as you can, but no, at some point you're out there on a ledge, and people are going to look and say, I told you it was a dumb thing to do. No. Take that chance to live your fullest life, which is never being one thing. We're kind of raised that it is, but it's never been true. Right. You're never just one thing.
And also the value and the power of art. I mean, I'm an arts advocate, so that, you know, there'd be no reason for me to even question it. But also, you mentioned earlier, you know, the first thing people go to when they're in pain, or the first thing people go to when they want to celebrate, you know, are the arts. And in particular, as you said, poetry, because poetry is able to concisely create imagery in such a beautiful way. I think that is also something that we should be celebrating right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. From the most painful feelings to the most joyous feelings. The poet is able to get in there with concise language to say, look at this, think about this. Someone said the other day, it was my moment listening to you of slowing down, of taking a breath, of really having time to think about whatever it is that is in front of me at the moment. And so, yeah, I think that is in part, I think, why poetry is enjoying such a renaissance.
Well, and as you notice with me, unexpected intimacy that makes you cry.
Yes.
Well, congratulations. So you mentioned the podcast, and then people want information. Obviously, LA Public Library is a critical part of us.
That absolutely. There is a page dedicated to the poet laureate. And the good thing about the podcast is they print a transcript of what I'm reading, so that people, if they want to live with the poem a little longer, they can do that. But in addition to that, I have told all the libraries in the public library system that anytime they want a poet, I'm happy to read for the library, particularly for young people. I have a project in mind that I'm not quite ready to talk about, but that I hope to be able to work with middle school and high schoolers on in applying the principles of poetry to what is unique about Los Angeles. Ooh. So it's something that I'm trying to flush out in terms of civic memory, how we view the city, particularly timely, I think, as we hopefully are coming out of this pandemic a little bit, but know that we're coming back to a city that's been ravaged by it. Buildings boarded up, businesses gone out of business. What do we want to save? What do we
Right.
think? Okay, we can let that go.
Time to go.
Yeah.
All right, well, then you have to keep us posted on all of this.
I plan to. Thank you
All right.
so much.
All right, it was really a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap on this LA Current.